At your job, do you ever have to deal with a nose roller? How about a snub pulley? Well, if you're installing a new conveyor belt system, dealing with the different components can sound like you're speaking a foreign language. Luckily, you've got a team ready to help. Grainger's technical product specialists are fluent in maintenance, repair, and operations. So whenever you want to talk shop, just reach out. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Motherhood. 1 minute, you're mom of the year.
I love you, Mommy.
Then the next, not so much. From bath time to bullying, from potty training to puberty, parenting is full of challenges. But one thing is for certain, you are not alone. Welcome to Modern Mom Probs. I'm your host, author, mother, parenting expert, Tara Clark. Join me while we tackle today's modern mom problems. Hey friends, welcome back to Modern Mom Probs, where we try to solve the world's modern mom problems. But if we can't do that, at least we're having fun talking about them. Today is a little bit of a more serious topic, and we are talking about navigating infant loss with Michelle Valiukenas. Michelle is a dedicated mom, a storyteller, and an advocate. She founded the Colette Louise Tisdahl Foundation with her husband after the loss of their angel daughter, Colette. Based in Illinois, Michelle is a writer and a speaker addressing topics like infertility, pregnancy loss, and maternal health. The foundation provides financial support, education, and advocacy to support families navigating high-risk pregnancies, NICU stays, and loss. Michelle's mission is to create a world where every choice, every parent, and every family feels supported and empowered. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
I just had to take a second there to put on some chapstick. How about that? You'd think that I would have known to do that before, but
That's okay.
it's okay. I'm all now I'm all nice and moisturized. I'm good to go. So, Michelle, you are a writer and a speaker, and you talk on topics like infertility and pregnancy loss and infant loss. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a mom of 3, and I have 2 angel babies, Sweet Pea, who I lost to miscarriage, and Colette, who I lost at 9 days old. And then my only living child, Elliot, who will be 4 in July, and who I believe has the energy of all 3 of the kids. That's my theory. And, really just, that's really what I am at my core as a mom, and I'm a storyteller. And the road to bringing kids home was fraught with a lot of issues. We dealt with infertility. We went to IVF. I've only ever gotten pregnant via IVF. And then we dealt with, once I got pregnant the first time, I lost. And then, we got pregnant and I made it, further in the pregnancy. We made it past kind of that scary first trimester that everyone talks about. And, we're really excited and told the world, and we're thrilled. When I was 21 weeks pregnant, I was hospitalized with preeclampsia and told I would be there until I delivered. And so, that was, talk about, kind of those moments that just sort of change everything. That was one of them. And, went through that, and then, was in the hospital a little over 3 weeks before the doctors recommended delivery. And so she was born at 24 weeks and 5 days, and just, straight to the NICU, really just a scary time. And then I had a lot of trauma with the birth afterwards. They had issues. My epidural wore off. And so I could actually feel them like working on me and, I had to be put under, which was something that they had told us they didn't want to happen. And, so I actually, as they were putting me under, I actually thought, I'm not going to wake up from this. This is really what I'm going to do. And, that's scary. And then, she was Colette was in NICU for 9 days, and just the ups and downs of NICU and all of that. And then her lungs were just not developed enough and weren't strong enough. And we lost her after 9 days. sort of skipping ahead, we tried again. Still to this day, they can't tell me why I developed preeclampsia. I have never felt like there's a great plan of how to avoid it in the future. And I finally had to, after doing another round of IVF that didn't take, I had to really come to a realization I was terrified to be pregnant again. And sat with that for a few weeks of just thinking I was a horrible person because I wanted to bring home a child, but the idea of me being pregnant just was terrifying. And then finally, really just decided that was not the path for us. And so we used a gestational carrier to bring home our son. Is just now parenting only one child, which is not at all what I saw. Or parenting in the traditional sense. Parenting after loss, right? Which is a whole other world and game. Throughout the journey, there's a lot of isolation. I still say that, losing a pregnancy, a baby is the most isolating event I think you can think of. And, for me, I found some people who are willing to talk about it, but it really was a push. And so that's why I talk a lot about it. I think this is happening more often to moms and to families. And I think we need to just start talking about it and start removing those stigmas and removing some of that isolation.
Yeah. Well said. I'm so sorry. I'm getting choked up. I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you,
Colette, because it is truly the unimaginable.
Right.
I suffered 3 miscarriages, just to give you context of my story, so we could sort of all be on the same page here, right? Mine is a very long story, but I will give you the condensed version of it. I suffered 3 miscarriages after very easily getting pregnant each time I tried. So got pregnant. All 3 times I lost them around 12 weeks, give or take. Then I had unexplained infertility, and we had no idea why. So then my husband and I decided to take a break from trying to have children because we said, this just isn't meant for us.
Mm-hmm.
And emotionally speaking, we needed to take a break because it was just so overwhelming and so all-consuming. Then we tried 3 attempts with IUI, and luckily we got pregnant with my son on the 3rd attempt and had Jack in fall of 2012. And when we were in the specialist's office one morning at 6:00 in the morning, because many times the infertility specialists are open at 6 a.m. so you could go in before work. And I remember my husband and I were there, and we looked at each other and we said, we will never ask for anything ever again if we could have one healthy baby and bring him home, and that's it. We will never rock the boat in terms of blessings or anything. And we were like pleading with heaven, and that was it. And so it worked. And we never, like I said, we never asked for anything again. And we had Jack, and he is our one and only, and we just love him to pieces. And that was a very short version of my story. Yesterday, I was on a podcast called Infertile AF.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on yesterday and told Allie my entire story, and it took 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. So the story from start to finish, if I really go through it and explain how the first one happened on my 29th, the first miscarriage happened on my 29th birthday. And it wasn't a miscarriage. It was actually, I went to my very first doctor's appointment, and they said, we don't hear a heartbeat. And my husband was in Disney World for work. He was at a conference actually in Orlando. He wasn't at Disney World per se. He was at a conference in Orlando and had to fly back from Orlando, Florida, surrounded by children and families.
Right.
And it was extraordinarily hard. And so again, if you want to hear that episode, go listen to that episode of Infertile AF, because I tell the entire story in 45 minutes. But to come back to what you were saying, Michelle, about the isolation. Mm-hmm. When this happened to us, it was 15 years ago. We didn't have the conversations on social media that we have now. Mm-hmm. And we chose not to tell our family. Maybe we chose to tell some close friends, but not many. My husband and I suffered through this alone and in silence. Not that I recommend people doing that now, but for us, that was our choice, that we didn't know what else to do. And I'm so happy that there are platforms like yours and foundations like yours and podcasts like this where we can speak up and share our stories about this. Because I thought at the time I was the only one going through this loss.
Yep. I think we all think that. Right.
I felt broken. I felt wrong. I mean, there were just so many things. It's like, why can't I carry this baby? Why do they keep dying? What is happening here?
Mm-hmm.
And then when I had the infertility after that, I was like, well, now what's wrong with my body? I just felt broken and I felt alone. And I'm so glad we're able to talk about this. My grandmother had 4 children, 5 children in total. Her first birth, her first son was a stillborn. And that happened in 1948. So I could only imagine how much she suffered in silence in 1948 for her firstborn, who was named Joseph, named after my grandfather. They subsequently went on to have 4 more children, my mother, one of them. And I just often think about my grandmother because that is unimaginable pain.
Right. Yeah. And similarly, I mean, I had a story with my grandmother. We didn't know anything about it in her final years. So this was she started to go downhill with dementia, might have been a Parkinson's. We're not totally sure about the diagnosis. But she was definitely starting to lose it. And shortly before Elliot was born, I was on the phone. My sister and I were both talking, 3-way phone call with my mom, who was her caregiver. My mom was just sort of venting about being a caregiver, right? And that was kind of like what she needed to do. And at some point, she started complaining about how tired she was because she said, like at 3:00 in the morning, she woke up screaming and was screaming about, bring me my baby. Where is my baby? Why won't you let me see my baby? And she's telling the story. And I kind of, was just like venting and I let her do this. And she sort of stopped. I said, Mom, did she ever have a loss? My mom sort of stopped and then she said, you know what? One time my grandmother, my great grandmother, did tell me that and had actually told my mom, my sister, who's my younger sister, was born 8 weeks early and was in NICU and all of that. And when her grandmother came to help out with me mostly, but she said, hopefully this doesn't turn out to anything like what your mom went through. And that was the only thing that my mom had ever known about this loss. And all of a sudden, she never talked about it, never discussed it, but in her dementia where those filters and that ability is all gone, she started reliving this. And, it was just so interesting to sort of sit back and then, to see. And I think, it was happening at a time where I think, and, this was in 2020. I think my mom is still sort of dealing with the idea of like, this happened to my mother. And this is like, this changed who my mother was. Right. And so like coming to terms with all of that, I think is really hard. And I think it was interesting that it so happened to be at this time between my mom and I, who was like, are you going to talk a lot about Colette? Are you going to share that with, baby to be? And I was like, yes, this is a sister, this is a sibling, this is part of our family. Like, of course we would. It's very interesting because I think my mom had some resistance to the idea of us doing that. And I feel like having had that experience, was really, just, I think, enlightening for all of us. And I think, I think back on my grandmother and I think some of the things that she did that I can relate to as a parent having suffered loss. And so, just really kind of thinking through that and thinking through the sadness of never being able to talk about one of your children. Right. And hers happened. She had 3 kids and then her 4th was a stillbirth. So that isolation and that just, refusal of like, okay, now it's done and move on, is so interesting that we did this for so many generations. And I'm really grateful to be at a point where, and it's still hard. I mean, I still get, people who say, why are you talking about all of this? It's been almost 6 years. What are you doing? That kind of thing. but that we can do those and that we have these platforms where we can create our own content and our own platforms to do that. And but no, I definitely think that this is something we're not talking about, and we should be.
Yeah. And excuse me, sorry for the cough there. And so for these stories are for the people who need to hear them. They're not for the naysayers that say, why are you still talking about this 6 years later? Well, the story's not for you. The story is for the families that need the reinsurance, that need the support, that need to be here and that want to hear this story, because I find comfort in hearing that and you find comfort in providing it. And so don't worry about the naysayers. Just, you're doing.
I long ago learned with this, that, one of the things that was really interesting to me, I think that really affected me is I never saw a world after Colette died in which I wouldn't talk about her, right? That just seemed foreign to me, right? Like, I'm a mom. I talk about my kids, right? I probably annoy the crap out of people about that I talk about my kids, right? That's what we're supposed to do. That's kind of like part of the job of being a mom. And so I never saw a world in which I did it. But what I was interesting was as we were hearing from people and we were getting cards and we were getting all this stuff, it was so interesting how many people disclosed their own losses. And so losses we had never known about, losses that I don't even know if they had really ever shared with anybody else. And that to me was like the final sort of idea of like, I have to be talking about this because all of these people, because as I was getting these, it was like, if I had known this previously, not that it would have repaired any hurt, not that it would have, made anything easier, but some of the isolation would have gone away. And at the time when Colette died, I only knew of, we have good family friends. Actually, the parents who lost, I was a flower girl in their wedding. It's kind of a multi-generational family friends. And they lost one of their twins to stillbirth. And, and so they were pretty outspoken about that. And I was about 18 when they had the loss. So I remember it. But I also remember, my grandmother, for example, same one who I just talked about who had lost, refused to go to the funeral that they had, and said, that's not what we do. You don't do that for a baby. And, and all of that. And just where I was hearing things where they were telling, mom to, okay, that's enough. Now let's move on and things like that. And, and so I remember a lot of that. And I remember even at, 17, 18, whatever I was, thinking, this just seems crazy. And then to be on the other side where I was a parent now, I was older now, and I had also lost, just kind of reaffirmed that like, we need to be talking about this, because if in this many years it hasn't really improved, then it needs to be talked about. And so I think that was really interesting to me. And I think that idea of so many people who had just, boxed that away and not talked about it ever again, I think was really the driving force and continues to be.
Yeah. I think so many times people want to offer words of encouragement and support, and they don't know what to say. So what would you say to people who are trying to be helpful and just simply are at a loss?
Right. So I always say my golden rule is remove the words just and at least from your vocabulary. Like, just don't even go there. I think also you're not going to fix it, right? You're just not going to fix it. So there is no, I think what we got a lot of was like, sometimes these things happen. She was too weak, and it was like, she's in a better place. And I was like, what better place is she in besides being, in my arms, my husband's arms, and family's arms, those kinds of things. I also think baby loss is interesting, right? So I think of when, we have other people in our lives who die. Nobody's saying like you can replace that person, right? Even like spouses, right? Even people who, get remarried at a funeral and the immediacy of loss. Nobody's saying like, oh, well, you can get remarried. Nobody's saying that, right? But somehow when it comes to baby loss, it's always like, well, you can have another. And I think that's really hard, because the transition to, and I'm sure the transition to trying again and having a pregnancy is a tough one. And so you're not, you're not going into it thinking that this is like some great big savior. You're going into this being like, I still want what I don't have, which is a living child. But I'm still mourning, right? I mean, I'm still mourning. We're talking the end of May is, Colette died on May 31st. And so it's 6 years later, and I still grieve her every single day, right? And some days are worse and some days are better. So I think in terms of what to say is, I think it is totally okay. And I think some of the best things I ever heard were, I don't know what to say, or I'm here for you. And, one of the things that my husband always had was, while I was in the hospital, he was missing, a lot of work, and we were, trying to figure things out. So like a lot of times he was going into the office on weekends when my parents were off of work and could stay with me, and then he could go in and work, all those kinds of things. And so there was an intern that started at his work, and he's like, I met her in passing, and I'm sure I made a terrible impression because like work was not top of mind and all of this. And after he came back after Colette died, he said the intern came in and said, I don't know what to say to you, but I can give you a hug. And, and he talks about like, that was one of the most beautiful things somebody could do, because she didn't know what to say. And there is nothing to say. Like, how do you say this, right? I mean, it's against all of our nature. We're not supposed to lose our children, right? Our children are supposed to bury us. Like that's supposed to be what happens. And so there is nothing to say that's going to fix it. And so it's really just about saying, I'm here and I will sit in the discomfort with you, and I will distract you if you need it. And whatever it is that you need in this moment in time, I'm here for it. And that's really, that's really an important piece, is just to be there and then to follow parents' leads. I think all of us grieve differently, and all of us have days where we want to sit in there and we want to cry and we want somebody who sits there with us. And then we have days where it's like, I just don't want to be, the mom who lost a child right now, or at least I want to, try to not be there. And that's really important as well. And so I think it's a balance of all of it. And,
It's so important to hold space.
Right.
And even if you're just sitting together,
right.
talking, not talking, like you said, follow the other one's lead
right.
into what they're in the mood to tackle or to not tackle that
right.
day.
Yeah.
It makes so much sense. How did you explain it to Elliot?
We talk a lot about Colette as his sister. We've talked about that she's in heaven. And, I think what's interesting, and I've long felt this way, even well before any of this happened, is that I think children are very intuitive. Children are way smarter. We don't give them enough credit, right? And what's interesting is we have a bear, we call it Coco Bear, that is representative of Colette and is in all of our family photos and things like that. We had newborn photos taken of Elliot at like 2 weeks old or whatever with the bear. And he reached out and held the bear's hand, and has in every single picture we have ever had with them, or with, the whole family. And so, I think even from that, right. And that's why I say like the 2-week-old, right? Like he didn't know what we were, he didn't really know, but he knew on some level. Right. And I think that's really interesting. And he has these moments, and I used to think this and where he'll kind of just stare off into space for a little while. And sometimes he'll smile. Sometimes he'll, giggle a little bit. A lot of times he'll end it and then he'll come and give, one of us a hug or something like that. And I very early on said he's talking to Colette, because it's such a unique experience and all of that. And, there was always a little part of me in the back of my head that was like, am I projecting this onto him? Right. And what I find interesting was that a couple of years ago, he was sitting in his high chair and he was eating, and I was sitting at the table, and I noticed he was doing his staring off, and then he started laughing, and like really laughing. And I said, okay, Mom wants to know the joke. What are you and Colette joking about? And he looked at me, and he looked in the direction he had been looking. And then he looked back at me, rolled his eyes, and looked back. And I thought, oh my God, I just had my children roll their eyes at me. Right. Like it was so it was so like, it was like this moment of like, and then thinking about, my sister and I are very close, and thinking about what my sister and I did to, like, oh God, now, mom's being
Mom.
blamed, right? Oh dad,
Yeah.
whatever. And that was like, for me, I was like, there's no doubt in my mind after that moment that he does that. But we talk about it, he knows Coco Bear, he knows Colette, the house that we bought when we were expecting, we were, still in infertility, but we had always been expecting to have 2 children at home. Has Jack and Jill bathrooms, so they're connected, but they're Jack and Jill bathrooms. And so Elliot's room. And so we still refer to Colette's room as Colette's room. And he knows, like, that's where the books are, like all of the books are. So he'll say, I want to get a book from Colette's room, things like that. And so, it's really just, we're constantly talking about her. We're constantly sharing. And, it's going to be age appropriate, right? He went through, and this was, I just remember feeling like the punch to the gut. He had a friend who at his preschool has a younger sister who goes to the infant room. And so he's seen both of them together, and he was talking about her sister. And I said, do you have a sister? And he looked at me and he said, no. And I remember just like feeling terrible. And like, I was changing him, and he went back to sleep. And I remember thinking, just really like being upset and going in and telling my husband and crying about it and thinking, what have I done? What have I done this? And then really having to, again, I went to like my lost mom friends, some of whom have older children. And I was just like, sort of poured my heart out. Like, I'm, sent them a message. I'm really, struggling today. And they were saying, that's bound to happen. And his concept of a sister that's not here, especially if he's seen other kids who have a sister that he can see, is really hard. And so, what does that look like? And, that happened. And then just last night, my husband was talking to him and said something, and I don't know how the whole conversation was going. It's just the 2 of them. And then he said, but I heard him, he said, well, Colette's my sister. And, and it's sort of just going with the ebbs and flows of what that's going to mean for him. But yeah, we're very straightforward, honest. Colette's name is mentioned all the time. He knows that. And, and we want to explain to him, there are things that we are going to react to differently than some of his friends' parents might. And that's coming from our trauma. And you need to know that. You need to, and he can't understand that yet. But, at some point he will need to acknowledge that's part of what comes with us parenting as well.
Yeah. You had mentioned reaching out to your community.
Right.
How did you find or create this community?
Yeah. I looked for support groups. I found one. And then, I think what I think is interesting among lost parents is that there is just an instant clicking, right? When you share your stories. And so I can remember actually one couple who was definitely part of our community. We met, so this was about 6 months or so after Colette died. They did in October for Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month. They did a memorial for the babies who had been lost at our hospital. And one of the couples she was pregnant at the time, we all got to get up and talk about our babies. And they came over afterwards and we just started, chatting away. And what was interesting was my family had come to this. And so after we were finished and whatever, my sister said, oh, where do you guys know them from? And I'm like, right now, just talking. And she was like, do you understand? Like, it looked like you guys had been friends for ages. And I was like, yeah, because it's this like bond right away that does this. Right. And so it's been interesting as we've gone on to have, living children and had that experience. It's been really interesting to have those things. And, she's part of, I always say I have my like mom group friends. And so I have a message that is like amongst all of us. And a lot of times it's just one of us saying, this thing happened and it triggered me, or like, I'm just frustrated today, or whatever that is. And a lot of times it's just people coming back in and saying, I totally feel you. I understand, that kind of thing, because it's really, there are points where you have, and so I can think of, my son's first day of preschool. So in August of last year, went to preschool. He did not have it very easy. I mean, he cried and we left, and we knew that was bound to happen. And so I was home and I was doing some work, and my phone lit up, and I looked down and it was the preschool calling. And as I was answering the phone, my heart's racing. My first thought was, they're calling to tell me my son is dead. And I know that sounds really extreme to it. And it turns out actually they were calling because the app system that we have that gives notifications was down. And so his teacher was calling just to sort of check in and give us an update. But that was my initial reaction. And that was, something. And so I could then tell my husband, who was like, okay, but everything's okay, but understood. But then I could reach out to this message in groups and say, like, this is the experience I just had. And whereas in a lot of cases, if I had just gone to a general moms group, maybe I would have found somebody likely who would have understood. But most of the part, they would have been like, who is this crazy woman who went there? And when I went to my Lost Moms group, what I got back was, oh my God, I've totally been there. Totally understand. One woman said, I actually have talked to my kid's school and said, when you call, I need you to immediately say nothing is wrong, and then go on to whatever it is. And so those kinds of things where I think it's really important. So I think it's just, I think it's interesting because I think once you start telling people, it's amazing how many people will then come to you and tell you their own losses. And so, I think those are always the interesting things, is just to see how quickly you will find people. But I do think that that's the most important thing. So whether it's a formal support group, whether it's a meetup, whether it's an online community, but really finding those people, because it doesn't go away. And you can have even years of really good days and then have a day that's terrible, or just a moment, right? Where it's like, oh my God, what's going on? What's happening today? And then having that community that gets it and understands it, I think is really important.
Yeah. For years, when October rolled around, I would get really sad because 2 of those 3 losses would have been born in October. Mm-hmm. And so you think about, oh, this should have been the baby's birthday. We should be celebrating this. All of those should be's. Coincidentally, October is, as you mentioned before, miscarriage and loss month. And so now when October still rolls around, I can't help but think about both things, right? So that I'm sure happens, across the board. You're always little things that you wouldn't think would trigger you do.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Is back to school shopping stressing you out, dreading long lists and running from store to store, hunting for those supplies? Ugh, I get it. Me too. This year, there's a better way. Introducing teacherlists.com, the website that makes back to school shopping a breeze. Teacher Lists takes teachers' back to school supply lists and transform them into easy to use shoppable lists online. That means no more scrambling to find the right notebooks or those mystery markers. Teacher Lists connects with major retailers like Target, Walmart, Amazon, Staples, and more. So you could shop for everything you need at your favorite store with just a click. No more running from store to store. Teacher Lists ensures that you get the exact items that your child's teacher wants, so your child is fully prepared and confident on the first day of school. This back-to-school season, ditch the stress and embrace the ease. Head over to teacherlists.com to order those supplies today. Happy shopping!
So, Michelle, you have a foundation. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So one of the things that, I had a lot of time after I was hospitalized with Colette to think about, and one of the things that I really resonated with me and I really held true was that I was so fortunate and so blessed that we could handle the financial aspect of, basically we lost my salary, and all of that. We could handle it. Right. And I also recognized we were in the rare category that could say that. And so I thought about it, and I really had a lot of time. Actually, the story is I'd been in the hospital about 2 days, and I said to my husband, like, we need to do something about this. And, he like rolled his eyes and said, could you for once just worry about yourself and not like what has happening to all these other people? And so I said, you know who you married. And, that's kind of like our funny story of where this started. But, really, that kept sticking with me. And I kept thinking about the fact of how even small bits of money would be so helpful. And so like I talked earlier about my sister was in NICU. So we're 4 years apart. So I was about 4. And, it just had so happened as things happen in, pairs. My grandfather had his first heart attack shortly before my sister was born. And so my grandparents were very involved throughout my whole life, weren't as available because they were doing doctor's appointments and all of that kind of stuff. And so my great grandmother got on a plane from New Jersey, came to Chicago, and basically was my caregiver for, a few months, whatever that was. And when Colette was in the NICU, I turned to my mom and I said, like, something like that, who paid for her ticket to come here? And my mom looked at me and goes, I have no idea. And this had been, at the time my sister was in her 30s, right? She said, I have no idea. All I know is that she came and I could just say, you've got Michelle. And I had one less worry. And so then it was things like that. Like, is that something we could do, right? Could we bring somebody with the price of an airline ticket, over, or a bus ticket, or whatever that looks like? And so all of those things kept, really resonating with me. When we lost, one of the things that we were told, I think because we were just so distraught and, didn't know how to make any decisions. But one of the things we were told when they were asking, do you have a funeral home? Which, by the way, who the hell has a funeral home for their child, right? And at one point they said, well, if it's a matter of money, a lot of parents choose to cremate instead of bury because it's a lot cheaper. And that stuck with me for a couple of reasons. First of all, what a terrible thing to be in that world and to feel that. Secondly, I personally am not like, I don't like cremation personally for a variety of reasons. And so it just occurred to me that like, if I was in a different position, I might have to choose this thing that I don't really like. And it's not something that's comforting to me for my child, which I should never have to think about these things. And how many other parents were doing those kinds of things. And so all of that, kind of kept resonating. And so I didn't intend to start something of my own. The joke is always, I had worked in nonprofits my whole career, and I'd always sworn up and down I would never, ever, ever, ever start my own nonprofit. Again, the world has a universe, whatever, has a way of, messing with you on those kinds of statements. But that was really, my belief. And so I looked for other places that were doing it. And what I found over and over again was that, people were doing it, but it was very geographically limited. It was very limited to hospitals. And it was very specific things like, this is what we do. This is all we cover. And, every family is different for so many reasons. And so they're going to have different needs. And so, after doing my research, after talking to social workers and frontline staff who were like, what can we do? What do you need from us to start this? We launched. And so we launched actually on Colette's due date, so September of 2018. And really to give financial assistance to families and kind of like what we say is the 3 stages of Colette's life, but also the 3 stages that are affecting this world. And so it's the high-risk pregnancy or pregnancy develops complications, NICU stays, and loss. It has grown. It is crazy. So we are about 5.5 years in, and we've helped over 2,300 families. We've hit all 50 states and given away over 1.5 million. And it's just been crazy. And we're not meeting the need, right? The need is so much greater than that. So it's just been, really interesting to see how much of a gap there was for, so long, where people were just falling into this, gap in this hole. And we're trying to, kind of plug up that hole a little bit, and always trying to do more and raise more and everything. So here's my plug. If you have anything, we love donations, and we have actually worked it out so that all of our donations go directly to our financial assistance program and to families. So there's no pain. You're not paying overhead. You're not paying any of that kind of stuff. And that is something we will continue to do. But, really just seeing how this is making a huge difference, right? So families who have to travel, families who, want to be able to bury or cremate their child, or to seek counseling afterwards, all of those kinds of things to actually, anybody who is listening who has children, like how would you be on bed rest during a pregnancy with kids, right? You probably need some help on that. So all of those kinds of things that we're doing that are really, hopefully, improving outcomes and improving the experience that families are having.
How can people, if they are in need of help, how can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website is ColetteLouise.com. So it's COLETTE Louise, LOUISE.com. And they can go there, they can apply on our website. It's a pretty straightforward application. And then we also require a verification. And so that can come from a social worker, a case manager, a doctor, nurse. Thing that's submitted, as long as they are submitted by Thursday at 5 p.m., both parts, we review them that weekend, and they'll get a decision letter by the end of the day, Monday. So we do a very quick turnaround because we know things are changing very quickly, and the assistance you need now, not, down the road. And so, we do that. And so it's a very straightforward process, and, really just trying to help as many families as we possibly can.
That is incredible. You should be so proud of yourself, Michelle.
Thank you.
For what you're able to achieve and how many families that you're able to help.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I see this as really the way that I'm parenting Colette. And, it looks very different than I would have ever expected. But this is the way, right? And so for me, we're talking about how do you talk about it? How do you, kind of do this? For me, I'm like, there's 2,300 families that have, heard at least a little bit of Colette's story, at least know a little bit of it. And some, and so that to me is really a beautiful thing that she has done this. She's better traveled than I am. She's gone to all 50 states. I have not. So, it's those kinds of things where it's like, even in her death, we're really just trying to have her live a life that, make sure that her memory and her name stays alive, and does something good in the world.
Yeah. Well, she's doing amazing things through her spirit and through her memory. And what a beautiful name. Colette Louise is just, it rolls off the tongue. It's musical. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm so grateful for you. I'm grateful for you keeping her memory going and celebrating the short, beautiful life that she had.
Thank you.
Michelle, thanks so much for being here today.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Modern Mom Probs. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive in today's problem with me, your host, Tara Clark. Join me next time when I'll be interviewing another great guest and tackling another modern mom problem. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review and a rating. As always, you could head over to Modern Mom Probs on Instagram and give me a follow, or check out my book, Modern Mom Probs, A Survival Guide for 21st Century Mothers, available online wherever books are sold. Well, that's it for today. See you next time, folks.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.